self-understanding. And at such a time as this, it is important to have resources which enhance our understanding and assist our response. In my 40-year career with the ABC, it was my job to observe the part played by religion in our social cohesion and understanding. Today's report is an important contribution to that task for all of us. In that context, it gives me great pleasure now to welcome Associate Professor Mehmet Ozalp of Charles Sturt University. Mehmet is one of the most prominent Muslim community leaders in Australia, and he's the Director of the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilization and the founder and Executive Director of the Islamic Sciences and Research Academy, ISRA. Mehmet, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well, John. How are you?
I'm fine. Well, you're here to introduce today's program, so let me hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks to everyone for attending. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which Islamic Sciences and Research Academy and Charles Sturt University campuses are situated. I'd just like to make a general introduction about the significance of this report that my colleague, Dr. Derya Inar, has produced. It is, as we are living in a wonderful democracy, a advanced liberal democracy in Australia, and we do celebrate multiculturalism. Nevertheless, it's our job to highlight some of the issues that we may have in our society. And Islamophobia is one such issue. For the last 20 years, I've been involved in both community work and also in academic world. In my community work since 9/11, I was associated with Affinity Intercultural Foundation, and from 2009 onwards, we established ISRA, Islamic Sciences and Research Academy. One thing that Muslims have complained the most was about Islamophobia, which is a repercussion of the global geopolitics, what happened in Middle East, war on terror, negative portrayal of Islam and Muslims in the media, and some Muslims unfortunately doing acts of terrorism. But the impact was on the entire Muslim community in Australia. Around the world, in Western societies, Muslims have faced the same issue, but our experience was in Australia. So we had to do something about this. And there was also a denial of such an issue, denial that Islamophobia exists, and no one was prepared to do anything in this regard. So being ISRA is Islamic education organization and Center for Islamic Studies at Charles Sturt University, we are researching and publishing on anything related to Muslims and Islam. So it was only natural that we had to tackle this issue. But obviously, it needed a lot of work. And this is where two wonderful women comes in place. One is Maryam Wayzada and the other is Dr. Derya Inar. Maryam Wayzada, I do recall our discussions with a number of community leaders about the need to do something about Islamophobia. And biggest issue was there was no data. There was, how do you substantiate and show that such a problem exists? How do you translate the experience of Muslims into some objective data? And this is when Maryam came in, and she has took on the difficult task of establishing the Islamophobia Register of Australia, which was founded in 2014. She's put in a lot of work into that, and at some personal cost to herself. Probably Maryam is the only Muslim in Australia who has received the most Islamophobic attacks in social media and online. And so we really thank her for putting herself on the line and producing or establishing Islamophobia Register of Australia, which still exists and collecting data. And at the moment, it's got 15,000 followers on Facebook alone. So that was really necessary to collect data. Excuse me. But obviously that's not enough. You have to process that data, analyze it, and write about it. And this is where my colleague, Dr. Daria Ina, comes in. And she has really took on the ownership of researching this issue for the last 6 years of her academic career. And she's produced these wonderful 3 reports, which I think conclusively shows that we have a really social problem in Australia, and that there is no denying it. We cannot push it under the carpet anymore. There will be 1 million Muslims living in Australia by 2023, by next year. That's a very significant minority. And as I said at the beginning, that Australia is a mature liberal democracy with a wonderful multicultural history and culture that is successful. We all appreciate that. Saying that Islamophobia exists does not tarnish that. And I think it's time for our politicians to really take this seriously and develop some public policy that safeguards the rights of a large large minority in Australia that Muslims make up. So I want to once again thank Daria and Mariam for the wonderful work they have done. And I have read the report. It's fantastic, 170 pages if people are interested. It will be available on a number of places, on Center for Islamic Studies, Charles Sturt University, and ISRA Australia on our homepage. You will be able to download the report, isra.org.au. So thank you very much. Over to you, John.
Professor Mehmet Ozal, thank you so much. Well, it's time now for the official launch of the report. And to do so, I'd like to introduce the Australian Race Discrimination Commissioner, Chintan. Chintan commenced his term as Race Discrimination Commissioner in 2018, and prior to joining the Commission, he spent 3 years as the Director for Multicultural Engagement at the Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. Chintan, from your extensive experience, welcome and thank you for introducing the report today.
I must not forget to unmute. Terribly important. Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to be in a program where you're hosting, because such clarity of thoughts and expression and such beautiful voice that you have, John. We still haven't lost it. So thank you for a kind introduction. Well, let me start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining you today, and Melbourne, the Oi Warang of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their connections to land, waters, and community, and pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and to the emerging leaders. And allow me to extend that respect to the elders of the lands that you are all joining from remotely today, and to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present at this launch. Thank you for the kind introduction, John, as I've said, and for the opportunity to launch the 3rd Islamophobia in Australia report. I want to extend my heartfelt appreciation and thanks in particular to Dr. Ina for the invitation today, and for her and the Islamophobia Register Australia's generous and ongoing support and contribution to the Australian Human Rights Commission work. And I want to obviously acknowledge every one of you here that has joined us today, including Mehmet, Zalea, and also Mariam as well earlier, as being participants in today's program. John and I had a quick discussion earlier on, and we're talking about peace in the world. We both were in agreement that it is a safer, more confident world that we lived in because of the work that Islamophobia Register does. And I want to thank the people behind it, and I want to thank the vision and the commitment that Dr. Anna and her team devote to this particular important area of building our society and in building the asset to the future of this country. So in my role as the Race Discrimination Commissioner, I've made addressing Islamophobia a key focus of my work. Stories my fellow Australians have shared with me, both formally and informally, about the experience and effects of Islamophobia in our individuals and communities' lives, and about their ability to fully enjoy their rights have gravely concerned me. And that is why I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to launch the Islamophobia in Australia report. As many of you already know, the report was prepared using data from incidents reported to the Islamophobia Register in 2018 to 19 by victims, proxies, by witnesses, and its analysis was led by the chief investigator, Dr. Anna. This report is the third Islamophobia in Australia report, the first report having been released in 2017. The Islamophobia Register is the first of its kind in Australia to provide a unique platform for Islamophobic incidents to be reported, recorded, and analyzed. The work done by Islamophobia Register addresses a significant gap in data collection on racism, bringing to light the experiences of Muslim communities and providing an evidence base from which to shape programs, policies, and the law to address Islamophobia and racism more broadly. And to that end, it is tremendously helpful for the work that we do at Human Rights Commission. Islamophobia Register's work has inspired other organizations to follow suit in the interest of making visible the experiences of racism faced by the communities they represent and contributing to a growing evidence base. The work that Islamophobia Register has made a significant contribution towards improved data collection on racism at the national level. The second Islamophobia in Australia report identified several trends that, although perhaps not surprising, especially for Muslim advocates who have been calling attention to growing Islamophobia for some time, were nonetheless deeply distressing. The first-hand accounts of acts of discrimination, vilification, and hate included in the report were truly heartbreaking and a stark reminder of how some of our fellow Australians do not freely enjoy the right to express their language, culture, and religion, and instead too often have that right infringed. I'm deeply distressed, and today being the third anniversary of the Christchurch massacre, that to find it in the wake of the Christchurch massacre, the experience and incidents of these events became heightened. Islamophobia Register reports in the aftermath of the attacks. Reports of offline cases to the register increased by 4 times, while reporting of online cases increased 18 times within the 2 weeks after the Christchurch attacks. This increase was especially stark in social media platforms. These findings point to the undeniable interrelationship of the online and physical world, as well as the need to take very seriously the grave harms that the online world, not effectively regulated, can cause Muslim communities and for other groups that experiences racism and discrimination. As in the second report, the third report, this year, has shown that Islamophobic incidents in the physical world continue to be very gendered, with perpetrators predominantly male, 74%, and victims predominantly women, 82%. In total, the report analyzes 247 verified incidents that occurred from January 2018 to December 2019, a period of 24 months. But we are reminded that reports of Islamophobic incidents likely represent only the tip of the iceberg, as underreporting of hate crimes and related incidents is recognized internationally as a problem. The findings of the report call for action. Social media platforms to take more responsibility, leadership at the level of decision makers, and a review of the protections in relation to both platforms and perpetrators. This last point is particularly poignant considering the online activity from the far right following the attacks discussed in the report, and which went on without investigation or penalty. The Human Rights Commission has been working to alleviate the experiences and effects of Islamophobia for some time, and has been particularly focused on areas that have been identified in the report. The findings of this report support both the findings of the commissions on sharing the stories of Australian Muslim report, which was released last year, and our consultation findings as we progress work on a national anti-racism framework to address racism across sectors and in all aspects of society. On 20th July 2021, the Commission released, as I've said, the Sharing the Stories of Australian Muslim report. The report reflects the experiences and concerns of over 1,000 Australian Muslims from across the country who participated in an online survey and in 37 in-depth consultations. The report shows that 80% of all Australian Muslims experience prejudice or discrimination, and 1 in 4, 23%, said they felt unable to speak up when they experienced discrimination. The survey and consultations revealed widespread concern among Australian Muslims that the far right is becoming more vocal in Australia, that the heightened Islamophobia experienced by women and children, especially women who wear religious dress, the harms of Islamophobia experienced in the online world, and the public narrative about Australian Muslims in the media and by public figures contributing to Islamophobia and appearing to create a license in the broader community to engage in acts of hate against Muslims. These findings have been further evidenced by the Islamophobia in Australia report today. As the report so powerfully reminds us once again, Islamophobia is not just a problem for Muslims, but requires national engagement if Australia is to maintain social cohesion. The report rightly notes we will need national engagement to address Islamophobia if Australia is to maintain social cohesion and live up to its multicultural legacy, as been so clearly highlighted by Professor Mamet. The Sharing of the Stories of Australian Muslims project also identified this as the key. The Commission called for the development of a national anti-racism framework in March 2021 in response to these concerns around Islamophobia, as well as rising anti-Asian racism, anti-Semitism, and inequities experienced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, in the context of a long history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership on anti-racism. The Commission released a concept paper proposing guiding principles, outcomes, and strategies, and have been consulting on this paper since. The framework will be a long-term central reference point to guide actions on anti-racism and equality by all levels of government, peak bodies, NGOs, communities, educators, businesses, and other sectors. To date, we have held 100 consultations on the framework, with governments, community members generously contributing their time and effort to share with us their priorities for the scope and the vision for the framework. We are proud to have the Islamophobia Register Australia sit on our multicultural advisory group for the framework to ensure that the essential voice of Muslim communities is reflected in this outcome. We received 170 submissions in response to our call from October last year through to February this year, an unprecedented number of submissions, pointing to the groundswell of momentum, calling for actions both nationally and in a global context. Our analysis of the consultation and submissions to date has highlighted the need to pursue work on priority issues in relation to online hate, media standards and regulations, and strengthen legislative frameworks and protections in this regard. In addition, the update of the Commission's Racism It Stops With Me campaign currently underway will be an important advocacy and capacity building tool under the overarching framework to build public awareness and counter the dehumanizing and normalization of race-based hate discussed in the report. Despite the troubling findings of the report, Dr. Inner has noted that Australia showcased its solidarity and support of Christchurch. Now, let me echo her call and my hope that this be activated in a sustained long-term way. A national commitment to eradicating racial and religious discrimination, intolerance, and hate hold, in my view, the greatest hope of countering unacceptable violence and harm in our community. So I look forward to continuing to collaborate with the Muslim community, government, and civil society to ensure that Australian Muslims feel protected and supported to the same extent as all other Australians. Protecting Australian Muslim communities' rights to safely express their cultural and religious beliefs is a priority for the Australian Human Rights Commission and for me as the Race Discrimination Commissioner. So once again, I would like to thank the Islamophobia Register Australia for their pioneering efforts in amplifying the experiences of Muslim communities and providing the groundwork for national action in response to Islamophobia. So congratulations to you all, and particularly to you, Dr. Inner, on the launch of the third Islamophobia in Australia report. Thank you all.
And thank you, Chintan, for that insight into your thinking and the understanding of the Race Discrimination Commission's work in this country and the contribution made by the report we're talking about today. It's now time to look at some of the findings from this year's report, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Daria Inner. Dr. Inner is Senior Lecturer and Research Coordinator at the Centre for Islamic Studies at Charles Sturt University, teaching and researching subjects on contemporary issues related to Islam. She is the Chief Investigator and Editor of the Islamophobia in Australia report in 2017, the first one, and Islamophobia in Australia report 2 in 2019. They drew worldwide attention, and Inner's recent publications include a co-edited volume with John Esposito, Islamophobia and Radicalisation, Breeding Intolerance and Violence. Dr. Daria Inner, welcome.
Thank you very much, John. I would like to start my talk firstly acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of the Darug people, where I live, where I work. And I acknowledge also, I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you very much to the commissioner. I think he articulated what I really wanted to say one by one. So I don't know if I really need to talk in this case, but maybe on behalf of the commissioner, I can show you the hard copies of the report. Hard copies are available, as Mehmet mentioned. It's a bit thick, but I think it's a worthwhile read. You should, you can order it. But also it is available online. And thank you to every single person present here. I think your support is very valuable to us. We feel like this is really, and I saw the profile of our attendees as well, that truly tells us that this is not Muslims' problem, it is Australia's problem, and everyone is, I think, representing different offices, different universities, different communities are present here. And I'm very grateful for making time to be with us today in this very special occasion. I would like to start the report. Maybe I can just, as mentioned, this is the Islamophobia report 3's page, cover page, and I would like to start the presentation by acknowledging the Christchurch victims. As you see, there were many children, and also other victims are also shown in the back cover of the project. This project is authored by me, but with the contribution of our dear statistician, Dr. Ron Mason, Chloe Smith, my dear research assistant, Rita Markwell, she contributed with a section in this report, but in addition to her, we had Professor Scott Pointing being the reviewer. We had a lot of people who took part to bring this project into fruition. And thank you to every one of you who had a contribution in printing, proofreading, designing, and also ISRA and Center for Islamic Studies funded this project, and thanks to them, and always Mariam. Without Mariam's initiative, we wouldn't have these reports, and without our reporters, we wouldn't be discussing these findings today. So thank you to every one of you, everyone who contributed to this project in different forms and shapes. I think the Commissioner, Mr. Chin, already gave an overview. So in addition to that, maybe I can mention in this report, we also wanted to include dates in parentheses so that you can see if the incident happened before, a day before, or a few days after, or a day after the Christchurch, so you can have an understanding of the context when you're reading the incident. There is not a representation of the entire Australian Islamophobia. However, the Human Rights Commission's report, Muslim Stories, and their finding, it is obviously wider scale. We see a lot of overlaps here. And here, really the intention is to show the manifestations of Islamophobia through lived experiences of people. And looking at using this similar data collection process, verification and grouping and SPSS analysis and same methodology, we are now able to compare and contrast data from the first report and until now. So wherever applicable, I'll try to make some comparisons to see the trend within this framework. Let's see. This project has different chapters: offline physical cases, and within that we had case studies looking at workplace discrimination, mosque attacks, and under online incidents we have analysis of post-Christchurch online cases, how the hate is orchestrated. Also conflation of Muslim identity with terrorism and its connection with far-right extremism as a case study. And after that, we compare and contrast online, offline features of Islamophobic incidents and focus on pre and post-Christchurch comparison to see the dynamics, changing dynamics in level of severity, in incident type, sometimes the rhetoric, hate rhetoric. We are comparing these two things, before and after Christchurch. And we conclude the study with a case study, offline and online interaction, specifically again focusing on the ripple effects of Christchurch, both online and offline. I need to underline the fact that this is not unique to Australia. Very much similar findings you can see if you look at similar reports in Europe, in Canada, in the United States, especially Europe case. Interestingly, Poland, Finland, Macedonia, or different Germany, different countries, and you see very similar patterns. And my conclusion, looking at the literature before and after the Christchurch reports and findings, and all these anecdotal also incidents right after the Christchurch, plus copycat attacks, my conclusion is that Islamophobia, and I want to differentiate, Islamophobia is not necessarily far-right movement or extremism, but there is a connection. But both the everyday racism type Islamophobia, but also escalated hate through far-right extremist discourse. Both of them are globally present, and we are seeing the local manifestations of it in Australia. And as Mehmet said, we are fortunate today to have a democracy and liberal system, and also commissioners like Mr. Chin, who can really bring these issues to better the society. And we are here to contribute to this good intention and do this great work. So the aim is not to really kind of show the, dirty side of what is going on, but genuinely, I think, identify, find the problem. Once we identify and find the problem and start measuring it, start changing. We want change, and we want to bring these findings into your attention. Yes, incidents are reported by proxies, victims, and witnesses. This time we saw a significant drop in witness reporting. It is almost 1/4. In comparison to the first report, it was almost half of the incidents reported by victims before. Now it's 1/4. That tells us something. Maybe we need to activate bystanders. A whole society approach needs to be maybe emphasized, so that this is taken, I think, in a broader scale as a problem of our society, rather than Muslim communities issue. Islamophobia is usually gendered, but this time with more women victims in comparison to the first report. So the first report, it was 68, now it is 82. A significant increase. If I put the second report, you will see a gradual increase, but I want to show you the spike when you look at the first 2014-15 and the 2018-19, what changed in the course of time. So we see an increase here. As usual, covered perpetrators looking for weak victims, and the victim for them is always visually identifiable Muslims, who are head covered women. So 85% of the incidents were targeting head covered women, or women alone, or women with other women, women with their children. And also 15% were children alone. We didn't see any case and the father and with a child being abused, not a single case. And that is not a coincidence. We didn't see it in the other reports as well. So it is really telling us the features, the patterns, characteristics of Islamophobia we are facing. Another feature of physical cases, victims are younger, from a younger cohort, and perpetrators are from an older cohort. Perpetrators mostly seen as Anglo, perceived as Anglo while being reported. And especially 1/4 of the victims were children and teenagers. Social relationship was existing in 1 out of 5 cases that included work, school, or social relationship. And on physical cases, we realized that you can't come up with a very certain, clear perpetrator profile. It is very diverse: homeless, drug addict, a gallery visitor, a university staff. So it is unpredictable, to be honest. It is very diverse, but also racist disrespect is a normal social behavior according to the reported incidents. Incidents happening in playground, at zoo, in a shopping center or a place. When families are together, sometimes perpetrators are dads, moms in front of their children. Sometimes their children are attending. So, and this is happening in crowds, in frequently visited places. That is also, I think, supporting the fact that racist disrespect is a not becoming a normal social behavior according to the reported cases. Guarded places. What is guarded places? We identified guarded places where security is enforced or surveillance cameras. These places, the incidents happening in these places are gradually increasing every single passing year. But when you look at the first report and compare it, the present one, it is a spike from 37% to 75% now. Incidents are happening guarded places, which simply means security measures are ineffective and Muslim women cannot feel safe in safe or guarded places. And commonly frequented places, we called it hotspots and coded, and 63% of cases happening in commonly frequented places means in people, among people, in society, when people are surrounding. So this tells us lacking social pressure to deter perpetrator. Perpetrator is brazen enough to attack. So, and shops, public transport, leisure park centers or parks, schools, unis, official buildings. This is bringing a question to mind, very safe. If it can happen anytime, very safe. We also identified and coded places as multiculturally more and less diverse suburbs, and incidents happening multiculturally more diverse suburb is also gradually increasing. There was an example of a woman living for 30 years in a Muslim populated suburb, and she was still calling Muslims as terrorists. So it is showing also a fixation, a very much fixated mind as well. Spending 30 years with Muslims and still calling them as terrorists is a concern. Let's look at quickly the online Islamophobia. As I said, it is quite distinctive. That's why in this case, we used slightly different terminology. We introduced far-right membership, radicalism, extremism, and terrorism. And wherever applicable, we use this terminology for a purpose in this part, in this section. This particular chapter is important because it captures the momentous discussions and evidences right after the Christchurch, first hour, after 1 hour, or the first 3 hours, first 2 days, first 1 week after the Christchurch. So, and we have all screenshots as well. They're not readily available. They're taken down mostly by the users, not necessarily by Facebook. It took a while, really. It was available for a long time. They are removed now, but we are using these as a case because they were traumatizing Muslims. That also shows us what kind of incidents mobilize people to report. And also people, while they're reporting, they're expressing the impact as well. So we are able to capture in these reports the impact caused by these online incidents. And according to our findings, because it is social media, you can easily identify, trace people's connections. 58% at least minimum were of the cases, they were associated with far-right movements. And the reporters, 90% of the reporters were Muslims. We can call them as witnesses, but in the meantime, victims, because they are directly affected by the severe anti-Muslim hate rhetoric as Muslims. Operation of hate in the online platforms, I would call it social media engineering, because the plethora of cases and seeing a very repetitive pattern really brought us to a conclusion that it is an engineering, a social media engineering. Far-right parties, leaders, and group admins are taking active roles to create agendas and engaging their followers and encouraging them to circulate and reproduce it. Reproduction is always putting their own comments and starting another discussion, feeding each other's opinions, comments, shares, and reactions. And these are as disturbing as the post content itself sometimes, especially when the Christchurch, even the attacker wasn't identified. It was so fresh in the first hour of the Christchurch attack, how people were explaining their joy for Muslims being killed in a mosque, and the reactions, loves, thumbs up, and then all these things, seeing them, and they were all captured as screenshots, were as disturbing as the content itself, according to the reporter's reaction, expression of impact. And within these circles, because of that very close hate, very thick hate rhetoric, when someone, even a non-Muslim, not necessarily Muslim, just a member of the society, questioning this unfair treatment and severe level of hate, they were silenced. So they were also made a target, and that way they were silenced as well. Looking at especially post-Christchurch hate and the content, we try to group them according to content, and what we found was exuberantly active and blatantly extremist posts. And when we look at the thematic grouping, it is starting with justifying the Christchurch, blaming Muslims, seeing them as deserving it, blaming sometimes the government for making or accepting Muslim immigrants. I'm sure you're familiar with this rhetoric from Fraser Anning, but that is taken to a further level, such as applauding the Christchurch terrorist for his bloodshed and seeing him as a savior concerned about his nation's future. And also very mocking, very insensitive language in the first days of the Christchurch. People were posting the best movie I have ever seen, and others saying, hoping another 10,000 Christchurch shootings to happen. And more violent killing suggestions came from some people saying, I would have walked in there, locked the door behind me and done it with a blade. They died too quick. And desiring more killings and bloodshed, saying 50 are down, millions to go. Hope it becomes a worldwide event. And look at the other post here. The best thing about the Christchurch shooting is that Muslims' kids were killed. This means that they can never grow up to kill us. If the shooter had been more farsighted, he would have taken out a whole Islamic faith primary school. Next time will be better. And as the commissioner mentioned, no penalty, no consequences. And because I know these guys, I can go into their website and see that these people are still active. They're still posting things. And this is concerning because this person is real. When you go to his Facebook profile, you see him, where he works, what he does. And this is concerning because this post is not just there as a few lines. There is a person behind this post. So the post-Christchurch online discourse made a massive impact, I guess, by contaminating the net rhetoric and escalating it. So it had an emboldening and dehumanizing effect, which reduced people's moral barriers to violence and inspiring performative responses. So people are getting used to this rhetoric, and it is itself a problem. So when we look at online cases, death threats increase massively. calling mass killing Muslims increased massively, calling that Muslims deserve this bloodshed, mosque attacks, 35%. This is really a big spike comparison to earlier years. And hate speech. In the first and second report, both offline and online cases, it was always religious appearance coming the most problematic hate rhetoric. But this time it reduced. In contrast, associating Muslims with terrorism doubled. And remember, we are not talking about ISIS attacks overseas. They're not, in force anymore. We are talking about Muslims being the victim of terrorism, but they are still condemned and blamed and associated with terrorism and portrayed as killers. And these Muslims seeing them as killers increased from 25 to 36%. Yes. I'm sure everyone in this field doing some study or readings can recall that Muslims conflated with terrorism in media portrayal or in day-to-day physical racist insults or abuses. Xenophobia, go back to your country type of rhetoric was always there. But this time, what happens is they are now evolving into anti-Muslim conspiracy theories. So now conflation of Muslims with terrorism is an excuse to deserve being killed, being massacred. And xenophobia is coming in the form here as Muslims, as bloody people, they don't deserve any land to live. So it's not just go back to your country. The content is really escalating, and it is a concerning change in this hate rhetoric. So violent attacks do not trigger guilt because Muslims are seen as terrorists, and deservingness, karma, and they are dangerous. Remember this praising for killing children. The idea, the logic is they will grow up and kill us. So cleanse them before they grow up. And this is a good, legitimate excuse for them to incite violence and cause bloodshed. So Islamophobia is a continuum, and Christchurch type attacks are the last link in the anti-Muslim hate chain. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will end up with a Christchurch type incident. However, some people are going into that direction, or at least this rhetoric is becoming normal. Why people don't choose extremist online channels but use low risk channels? They want to really infuse these ideas into the society, which is a concern. And when we look at pre and post Christchurch findings as well, we see constant increase in every area: insult, death threat, incident type, and an increase after post Christchurch. And our online offline interaction case study shows that not only online platforms not only become a fertile soil for the spread of hateful ideas, but also motivate real life action. And this was very much seen by engaging online platforms before Christchurch attack. Let's say in the morning of Christchurch attack, the terrorist was sending, I think, HN what he's going to do during the Christchurch with live broadcasting through Facebook, and after the Christchurch through his manifesto and links and circulation, and far-right groups encouraging their followers to download, read, watch. And this was a very global far-right extremist organized, I would say, when I say organized, maybe repetitive pattern we see. That increases the mobilization of like-minded people, as we saw in copycat attacks, but also massive impact on target communities. Interaction of online and offline. Here is a man with his rifle. He's saying, after the Christchurch, I'm ready for the civil war to start in Australia. And here is another person. He is showing, proudly flagging his support for the Christchurch terrorists by putting his profile, remove kebab motto, which means a lot to everyone, knowing what the background, what does it mean, what it means. And also another post of himself, immediately after the Christchurch terrorists' first court appearance, he is imitating the hand gesture of terrorists, and he is supporting this terrorist. This man is real. I know his name, I know his profile, I know where he lives. Do you think a Muslim seeing all don't have any reason to fear? So I think I will leave you thinking about the connection, interaction between Islamophobia, online, and also offline, physical life, and anti-Muslim hate, and how it is interacting with the online version of Islamophobia. And there are distinctive features, but in the meantime, it is illusion to take it as isolated one, platform. It is not. It is feeding each other, and it escalates, and it causes, I think, longer term problems, as said, in terms of impact, in terms of mobilizing like-minded people, but also in terms of contaminating the rhetoric out there. Thank you very much for your patience and listening to me. That's it from me today.
Dr. Derry, thank you so much for that. An extraordinarily informative and in-depth report, and something which, of course, as it should, raises as many questions as it seeks to probe. Well, now it's time to call upon Mariam Vizadeh, founder and president of the Islamophobia Register and board member of the Australian Muslim Women's Centre for Human Rights, for some closing remarks. Mariam.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. And I'm joining you from Camaragal country, and like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's very sobering to have had Professor Delia Enna just take us through the findings of the third Islamophobia in Australia report. And I will be doing a vote of thanks, and there's extraordinary amount of people that have been involved in getting this report to where it is today, and also basically working on Islamophobia more broadly. So I will go through the list of those individuals shortly. But before I do that, I just want to spend just a few minutes explaining, I suppose, many of you are probably familiar with the story of how the Islamophobia Register itself sort of was born, but I'll take you through some of that detail. And in terms of the vote of thanks, I just want to express my absolute heartfelt gratitude to Delia, who just presented. And Delia and I feel that over the last, say, 6 years, we've trauma bonded over the highs and lows of being sort of at the forefront of this anti-Islamophobia work. And Delia has sacrificed a lot, at personal cost to herself as well, and many, many hours of unpaid work, effectively to be able to get the last 3 reports out in the manner in which we've done. Speaking to a journalist yesterday about this particular report, he made the point that the findings are from a few years ago, and every time the report comes out, it's, there's a little bit of delay in terms of the findings. And the point that I've always made is we know how important this work is, but the resourcing that we have to work with, unfortunately, is not vast. So whilst we are so incredibly grateful to CSU, to ISRA, to all of the organisations that have been involved in effectively helping fund this particular report over the years since the register started, that financial support has, you know, not always necessarily been steady. Everyone's tried their best, and this is something that we've had a team of volunteers work countless hours to get the register to where it is today, and to be able to produce, you know, what you're seeing in the third report this year that we're launching today. And so the story of Islamophobia, the register itself is 8 years old, which is the age of my first child, the age of my daughter. I've often commented on the fact that the Islamophobia register is my third child, probably the most difficult child that's given me the most amount of grief. I started the Islamophobia register actually when I was on parental leave with my first child. People have joked about the fact that I don't know what to do with time, and I always keep myself busy. But I started it because I was noticing anecdotally the level of Islamophobia that was happening to people around me, including myself. And that's why I felt the register needed to be founded, so that we had a place to store the data. Now, over those years, this movement has grown. The number of people studying Islamophobia more broadly has grown, and that has been fantastic. That's precisely the objective that we set out to achieve as a starting point for somewhere for the data to be, and for the data to be captured in this way and then to be analysed, which we are now so grateful that we're able to do that. So that said, one of the things I've always been focused on in terms of advocacy is not necessarily centering ourselves as advocates in the cause. Unfortunately, however, this work, doing in the Islamophobia work, meant that I myself did become, you know, part of very much a target, which has taken a toll. But it has also strengthened my resolve to keep doing this work. And whilst my level of, you know, sort of hours that I'm able to dedicate to the register is not as significant as it once used to be, because I'm wearing multiple hats and engaging in lots of different advocacy causes, including that of Afghanistan, my home country, in the last 6 months. But what I can see, that the work that I continue to do, whether it's in my capacity as CEO of Media Diversity Australia, all the work that I'm doing on boards and advocacy in Afghanistan, what underpins that also, that work, is Islamophobia, racism. So all of these things are deeply connected, and I know that the work of the Islamophobia register is incredibly important. So what I ask of you, those of you that are dialed in, is one, thank you for being here. Thank you for, you know, and we are often sometimes, you know, I think the first report, we will wondering whether we're able to get external stakeholders outside of the Muslim community. Just like when it comes to feminist issue, it requires male allies. When it comes to Islamophobic issues, it requires allies that may not necessarily have skin in the game, so to speak, but its allyship is incredibly important. And I'd also request that allyship can be extended to financially supporting the work of the Islamophobia register. We are so grateful for the financial contributions, including those of you dialed into this call that have provided us grants, but we would love for that to continue so we can continue our work. So that said, this report would not have been possible without the incredible dedication of Professor Dedia, and so our gratitude is to you, the Islamophobia victims, the witnesses that have reported. We notice that bystanders is something that we need to activate further, so we will hope to do some more projects in that space. I'd like to thank the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilization of Charles Sturt University, Professor Mehmet Ozab, thank you so much for your support. You've been there from really early stages. I'd like to thank ISRA, Ahmed Ozturk from ISRA, for your support financially and morally. The statistician, Dr. Ron Mason, research assistant Chloe Smith, Sana Fiani, who's our employee from the register, has been wonderfully supportive, and also Dedia's first assistant, Iman Zayed. Thank you so much for all the wonderful work and support you've provided over the years. I'd also like to thank Professor Scott Ponting and Rita Jabri Mackwell for both reviewing and the contributions to the chapters. Rita has been an absolute asset and a gem to the register for many years. Vicky Snowden, thank you for your support in proofreading. I'd also like to thank the designers of the report, Lama Fada and KSL Casey. Ahmed Kalani, thank you so much for the report printing. And again, just I know it feels like a huge thank you, but also back to Dedia, none of this would be possible without your dedication. So we hope that you will continue to support the Islamophobia Register as we grow and do this vitally important work. Back to you, John.
Mariam, thank you so much. And thank you again, particularly to Daria for all her work. And thank you at home or wherever you happen to be around the world for joining us today. And don't forget, you can obtain the Islamophobia in Australia 2022 report on the ISRA website at isra.org.au. And if you happen to become aware of any incidents of Islamophobia in your community, which you think are worth mentioning to someone, let the folk at ISRA know about it. Well, thank you for your attendance today. Good afternoon.